Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. So I'm Michael Casey. I'm the chairman of the Decentralized AI Society, otherwise known as DAIS. But last time we chatted, I had a different hat on.
You did.
It was at CoinDesk. So I'm the one that's having a dynamic. You're the more stable figure in this right now.
Which is weird.
It is weird. It is weird. That's not the way it tends to roll. Certainly not in the blockchain space. But yeah, we met in NeoCon in Lisbon and had a really good conversation then about the dangers of the Web 2 system for society, and therefore the need to move to an open web. Mm-hmm. And of course, AI was a big part of that conversation, and Ilya at that event was really sort of outlining the AI vision for Neo at the time. But I feel even in that short period of time, we're now at a point where the AI element of that conversation has been elevated to an even higher degree of importance.
Absolutely.
And I think we probably chatted then about how dangerous it is that we would take this closed, situation where the data and the models and everything else are owned by these large platforms in the Web 2 era, pushing into the AI era and taking it on steroids, and how dangerous would that be?
Yeah.
So here we are. It's moving faster. Why is this important? Let's just dig into that.
Yeah, sure.
Why is it so important that we decentralize AI?
Sure. I mean, and as a side note, we do a lot of these fireside chats together. Next one we should try and do actually in front of an actual fire.
Oh, right.
If we can maybe do.
Right.
Not
yeah.
here. Do you want for
fire
that?
fronting.
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
We did the fireplace.
I know we can do one in Switzerland or something.
Hope you guys
up in the
come
mountains.
along. Yeah.
So why is it so important? I mean, I think a lot of folks who have been interested in or following Web3 understand that, there is a vision for recasting the incentive models that drive the platforms that we use every single day in our lives. This is the Web2 set of innovations that have transformed everything that we do. They touch every aspect of our lives, and they're really good at providing the services and the experiences that we've become very used to and have kind of embedded themselves, literally in everything that we do. How we meet people, how we form relationships, how we transact, how we work, all of this kind of stuff, right? And the fundamental incentive model that dominates the way that those platforms have been set up is, they are, generally speaking, they are, stakeholder companies, right? They're run by businesses that have investors. The objective of those businesses is to make money, right, and return money to their stakeholders. And the model that they have, focused on and realized is extremely effective is they monetize our attention. So they say, look, we need to capture as many eyeballs as possible in order to generate profit that we can return to our investors. And that is the sole motivation and the sole economic driver that informs decision makings and how these platforms are developed and how they have been growing over time. And because these things are some of the biggest platforms, the most valuable platforms, the biggest companies in the history of humanity, they've gotten really good at capturing our attention, right, in ways that most of us aren't even aware of, right? They have teams of psychologists and neurologists, and they figure out the best combination of colors and lights and sounds to capture our attention. And because all they care about is attention, they're not optimizing for example, things like what are the best outcomes for the users? What are we doing to ensure that we're trying to get the most, truthful content? What are we doing to create platforms that allow for informed and effective debate? No, we don't want any of that. We want things that capture the most attention, and that tends to be things that are controversial. That tends to be things that maybe aren't true because they're controversial. And as a result, the consequences of this model, and again, it's not necessarily Machiavellian. I'm not saying that people are setting out to destroy the planet or to create friction and polarization in our social and political discourse, or to create wealth inequality, all of these types of things. But it's an inevitable consequence when you have these platforms that are set up with that attention-capturing, profit-generating motive in mind. And if we aren't careful and we don't do something to try and transform that dynamic and give people a better alternative and a new type of incentive model to reset that state, then actually the capture and control will continue to happen. We will continue to lose our autonomy and honestly our dignity in our digital lives, and really, the digital component of what we are doing is going to continue to get bigger and bigger. And as we talked about, when you think about the dominant AI platforms currently, and you're right, a lot has changed even since last year when we were sitting down and talking about this. These platforms are growing incredibly fast. They're incredibly powerful, magical for people to use, and indeed can create really incredible experiences. But they're driven by that same model, right? That same incentive framework where they're wanting to capture attention, capture information, and the users are effectively the product.
Right, but we kind of were duped, if you like, collectively as a society into that role. And then even as we've become, I think, far more aware as a society of these problems, it is still proving very difficult to convince people of the value of that, right? And so I was thinking, that we've got this agentic age we're talking about. The agents are coming. And I've seen some people refer to, okay, are we going to get Agent Smith? Like, you guys remember The Matrix? And Agent Smith was Hugo Weaving's character, this horrible, sinister figure. And there's a scene in The Matrix where he's just multiplied, however many hundreds of times. And, that's a sort of a dark dystopian vision of these agents that are not acting as if they are our agents, but in fact they belong to some other more sinister force. But even that is proving hard to convince people that you don't want that, right? Because all the convenience and the ease of these wonderful, as you put it, magical experiences are hard. So how do we think about how we have our cake and eat it too? Where we are building these systems that are fairer, are not abusing people, give us autonomy, and end up with something that is far more pro-human and pro-social. But also, it's because people are like, this is cool, I want that. And they don't have to be worried about like doing it from a moral or like self-protection obligation, but rather it's actually economically enticing.
Yeah, rather than doing it for kind of negative, I'm fearful of certain outcomes, I'm doing it for positive reasons because they enable experiences that weren't possible before. So I agree with that. I mean, I think there's two parts to this, right? I think we've had, the fundamental feature of Web3 technology is that it enables you to set up these structures in a way where incentives are more appropriately distributed, where you can have privacy by design, you can have true ownership of the digital assets and data that you accumulate and use every single day. And you can also have ownership of and sharing in the profits that are generated by the platforms themselves, right? So we have that technology in Web3, and we've had it for quite some time, actually. And to your point, the challenge I think that the industry has faced historically has been, we adopted the mantra of like, build it and they will come, right? We have all of this great infrastructure, and the users will just, the founders will come, the businesses will come, and the web will be transformed. But actually, that hasn't happened in the way that I think a lot of us hoped that it would, primarily because we've not spent enough time giving users the experiences that can actually at least match, but ideally can do better than the current Web 2 experiences. And I think if you don't give people, to your point, that positive reason to want to switch the magic that only this technology can enable, then we won't be able to drag the majority of folks from the current paradigm to the new one, because the status quo is very, very powerful. And as I mentioned, the organizations that are developing and funding these products are also very powerful, right? And not only do they have the resources to build more addictive products and to capture our attention and our focus more, they're also the ones that are speaking with regulators and lawmakers globally to ensure that the regulatory regime is such that it actually enhances that capture and control that they've already been able to achieve.
Here's an idea. So we were talking earlier about, how does the near vision fit within this? And a key aspect of it is this abstraction process. And sort of we're talking about, obviously, chain abstraction, abstracting away the friction that exists between moving assets across chain. But when you think about it, this problem of interoperability, or the lack of interoperability, it runs far deeper than just the blockchain world. It's an element of every aspect of our digital lives. Like just taking a post on LinkedIn and trying to sort of share it on Twitter, is that there's just no interaction. That creates this mental barrier for us. This friction is all the way there. But AI agents could do that quite effectively. Is there an advantage that, say, Near or anybody else building in this way that is trying to create this more decentralized approach to this has in being able to deliver that as a positive experience to people? Like, just, we can solve your daily challenges of moving back and forth between these different things.
I think definitely it's a great question. And for those of you who caught Ilya's talk to kick off Redacted yesterday, he talked about how we have these three technological pillars in the ecosystem. You've got the core layer on blockchain, you have the chain abstraction kind of technology stack, and then you have all of the user-owned AI work that is also being done. And it's that combination of these components that can do exactly that, right? So I think you have the blockchain component, which can enable the kind of user-owned features of these systems. You have the chain abstraction technology, which removes complexity and connects all of these different ecosystems and pieces of infrastructure together in a seamless way, so that for developers and for users, it's easy to use. And as we said, this ease of use, particularly for end users, but I think also for builders, is very important. And then you have all of this user-owned AI features and functionality, and there's a bunch of different things that we could dive into on that you take those two other ingredients and you expand it into what AI is currently capable of. And when you have all of those three things together, indeed, you can have magical experiences that have not been possible before. And in particular, and one of the demos that Ilya showed is you can have agents that can take complex actions and execute them on a user's behalf. So instead of having to do 15 steps when you're trying to buy a bicycle, right, you can actually do all of that in one place, and it can be done by an agent that you truly own, that is private, and that is kind of fighting your corner, which we all need. We all need someone that is fighting our corner at scale, and that is exactly what these are.
That's why I think, in fact, the whole privacy meets convenience thing is actually right at that space it starts to work. Because I think that level of trust, the conversation about needing to trust, gets all the more intense when you are explaining to people it's your agent, right? But that very idea is ingrained in actual law, right? There's principal agent laws that place all these fiduciary responsibilities on an agent that they cannot act in anybody else's interest. They have to act on behalf of the principal, you being the principal in this case. And I think people get that, they'll understand that, right? So I want that thing to be trusted, but I also want it to be able to therefore do all these difficult tasks on my behalf. The lawyer that I could never write a contract, this lawyer's going to do it for me, but they have a fiduciary duty to me, is now translated into a software sense. So I certainly see that as being a real opportunity to bring the mainstream on board on that. But there's another aspect I want to talk about, because we started talking about the Magnificent Seven, the big platforms, and there is a huge head start that they have in this. And I think regardless of whether or not we can produce magical experiences that are decentralized and trustworthy and just really solve all these problems, the very fact that they have $17 trillion in market cap amongst those top 7 companies in the US, it's more than a third of the S&P 500. And they sort of own most of the data, certainly the public data of the internet, has gone through those very same companies. They control the compute. NVIDIA is one of those companies that's responsible for 95% of all AI chip production.
Yep.
And I would argue they actually own the policymakers, because they're the ones who are sitting down having the meetings in Congress and talking through what this regulatory capture model might look like. How do we go up? That $17 trillion is a war chest. They can acquire whatever innovations they want to either incorporate or just to take out into the woodshed and kill, just to suppress. How do we, as an ecosystem, as a community, in a rather fragmented way, fight them?
It's a great question. I mean, well, one, indeed, scary picture that you just painted, right? But I think if it was...
It made it so gloomy.
If it was...
we need a fire bias to be...
Yeah, exactly. But also, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? So I think we all acknowledge, and anyone that's been in Web3 for a while will acknowledge and understand that this is not an easy task, right? Fundamentally overhauling the digital infrastructure of all of our lives is not something that's going to happen tomorrow. It's also not something that's going to happen without marshalling significant resources, significant technical innovations, and also with an enormous amount of persistence and dedication, right? And we've already, this industry has not been alive that long, but it's been a long time, and at many times it's been an uphill battle. But when you think about what has been achieved, what the technology is now capable of versus even just a year ago is quite amazing. And I think you see one of the superpowers of our industry is that we do everything open source, right? And kind of community owned and funded and operated in many cases. And that does give us an advantage, that does give us an edge. But I think to be more specific, one of the best ways that we can begin to push back against the status quo and all of the kind of inherent advantages that they have is, first of all, working together as effectively as possible. You're right, you mentioned the word fragmented. Web3 is an enormously fragmented industry at the moment, not just in terms of all of the different ecosystems, but even from a user experience and developer experience perspective, right? It's hard to navigate. You know, could my grandmother use any Web3 technology at the moment? No way, right? And I think that needs to be the benchmark for ease of use and also ease of development. And that's why we think the chain abstraction technology that you mentioned earlier is so fundamentally important, because it allows us to unify all of these different pieces into a stronger, more coherent, more effective whole. And that's definitely one of the ways that we are able to be more effective. And then I think the other is leaning into what differentiates us, which is we do everything open source. We do everything at pace, in the open, consistently running these feedback loops. And Alex Skidnov was yesterday talking about how, we have an aspiration to build a new foundational model, one of the largest ever, and to do that in a decentralized way, right, fully in the open, in a way that folks that are contributing training data will be incentivized to do that, will have ownership over that information and full transparency over how it's being used. And these are the types of features, to kind of go full circle, if you're a user where you can actually see and be rewarded for the information that you have contributed to the model, that helps to give people the reason to move into an experiment with this technology.
So I think that ownership piece to me is the one that really resonates the most, because when you look at that 17 trillion, right, and you say, how on earth are we ever going to raise that sort of money? If you think through the lens of traditional venture money, which, by the way, means that you have to then build the same incentive structure into it, right?
But look at OpenAI and what
right.
They started out as a non-profit and now they are a for-profit.
Thoroughly recommend, by the way, reading a recent book. I'm sort of blanking on its name, but it talks about this transition from both OpenAI and DeepMind, from being these sort of like very egalitarian open source things, and how they were just transformed into corporate vehicles because the incentives are all misaligned.
Well, they can't help it, right? Because they realize
supremacy,
that to develop these models is enormously expensive. It's one of the most expensive things that we can do as human beings. And the only, at that time, all their choice was, well, if we want to do this in a centralized way, we have to go get money from investors.
Right.
They expect a return on capital. They expect ownership and control. And you fall into the trap.
Yeah,
right.
So they created
Despite
a not-for-profit that was supposed to protect them from that, but eventually the ownership, the VC structure, it just takes you in that direction. Because look, that's what capitalism does. That's nothing wrong with that. That's the inherent structure in there.
Right.
But I do think that like the very idea that we can collectively own, we all own by virtue of putting our data, our compute, our devices, that's the one thing to me that feels like we can take it on. Because if you unlock that power, it's so much bigger. And that may be the only way to eventually, take the fight to that 17 trillion.
Yeah, I agreed, and I think it's also about helping people understand what ownership actually means. Because we talk about that a lot. It's like, oh, you can own your own data, you own your asset. For people, who maybe aren't steeped in our industry, what does that actually mean? And I think, there are, one great way is that, well, it means that if you contribute information, data, which is valuable, you'll be paid for it. You can see that every single day, right? This is something that is very relatable to people. Or, for example, if you've got a very private piece of information, you don't want it to be in every single large language model out there, which, by the way, if any of you have publicly available information online, it is in ChatGPT's models, for example. It is in all of these large language models because they've just scraped the entire internet. You might not feel comfortable with that, right? And again, if you can help explain to people what it actually means with relatable everyday examples, this is how we can begin to, I guess, get the momentum and the groundswell to begin to take the fight.
I think of it as a movement, right? An IRL movement.
That's what we're here for.
Redacted. So it's like building the movement. So I always feel like when I come to near events, I feel a real energy. There's it's a community of people who I think, almost more than any other that I've noticed within the crypto space, really feel like there's something bigger than just like, whatever money they're making, whatever project they're on. There is a higher purpose to all this. So congratulations to you guys for being able to get that spirit going to all these events and putting on another wonderful show here in Bangkok. So a round of applause for Chris Donovan, everybody.